What issue was he addressing, Peter? What did some say about the apostles when they began speaking in tongues? You're drunk. They accused him of being drunk. In Acts, the 2nd chapter, in verse 14, but Peter, taking his stand with the 11, raised his voice and declared to them, men of Judea and all who live in Jerusalem, let this be known to you and give heed to my words. For these men are not drunk as you suppose, for it is only the 3rd hour of the day, but this is what was spoken of through the prophet Joel. And then verses 17 through 21 are taken from Joel, the 2nd chapter. So be mindful of that as we get into the book of Joel. Now, what is the book of Joel about? Locust? It's about a locust plague. What does a locust plague have to do with the outpouring of the Spirit on the day of Pentecost? That's just a question. We'll address that and look at that as we move through. Where else in the New Testament do we see a verse quoted from the book of Joel? It's Romans 10 and verse 13. Romans 10 and verse 13, if you'll look at that passage, let's look at verse 12, Romans 10 verse 12. Paul is writing, and the book, what's the book of Romans about? It's about justification by faith as compared to justification by works of law. He states in verse 12 of Romans chapter 10, there is no distinction between Jew and Greek, for the same Lord is Lord of all, abounding in riches for all who call on him. For whoever will call on the name of the Lord will be saved. What does that have to do with a locust plague? Joel 2:32. But what does that have to do with a locust plague? Well, we're gonna look at this. So tell me about this locust plague that we read about in these 3 chapters of the book of Joel. It destroyed the land. It stripped the land of vegetation. And you can imagine if there's going to be dry land, and what happens when you have dry land? Fire. And then when you have fires throughout the land, it dries up the streams, and it can contribute to drought. So this was a cataclysmic event in Palestine. And God, speaking through Joel, makes application of this event to their lives. What would that application be? What is a lesson that they are to learn from this locust plague? Okay. This is a harbinger of future judgment. The prophet Joel, and there's different views on when he prophesied. Some consider him a prophet who was sent to the people after the Babylonian exile. Others believe that he was one of the first prophets, one of the very early prophets, and he would be more contemporary with Hosea and Amos. We studied Hosea already, and we're going to get to Amos after we get through the book of Joel. Probably was a prophet who worked earlier in the history of Israel. And if you look at the timeline in your workbook, which we made reference to several times when we first got together, you'll see that the author of the workbook considers him as one who prophesied earlier on in the history of Israel. And there's some good reasons why a person would believe that, but, you know, there's different schools of thought, and that's one of those things that I'm not going to be dogmatic on, because I think the lessons are the same. But be that as it may, this locust plague was sent by God, and it was sent to wake the people up. The people were becoming more wicked. This prophet speaks, it would seem, primarily to the southern kingdom, even though at this time the lesson would have been applicable to both those in the north as well as the south. But this is judgment of which he speaks in the form of a locust plague. And he spends two chapters describing this locust plague. And he's using it again to tell the people, you've never seen anything like this. your grandparents, your great-grandparents have never seen anything like this. They're going to be talking about this locust plague for years to come. In fact, he even tells them, you need to tell your children and your grandchildren about this. And it's going to be used by God as a harbinger of judgment, but as Brother Thompson stated well, things are going to get worse than this. You think these times are bad, if you don't repent, if you don't change, things are going to get a lot worse. Now, we know the rest of the story. We've got the full history, and we know that things did get worse. The people did drift further and further away from God, and the judgment that God brought against them was much worse than a locust plague. All right, so let's go to verse 1, chapter 1. The word of the Lord that came to Joel, son of Pethuel. Hear this, O elders. You'll see here a difference from what we saw in the book of Hosea. The prophet would speak to the kings and the princes. Here he's just speaking to the older ones among them, perhaps the spiritual leaders. Hear this, O elders, and listen, all inhabitants of the land. Has anything like this happened in your days or in your father's days? Tell your sons about it, and let your sons tell their sons, and their sons the next generation. Now, what's something that has happened in your lifetime of which you could say that nothing like this has ever happened? Has it happened in your father's day? What's something that's happened? COVID, pandemic, what else? Sorry? 911? That goes back before most of us. Les said the boll weevils were bad one time. Yeah? Okay, and you know, when things like that happen, 911, the pandemic, it gets the attention of everyone, doesn't it? Whether you're religious or non-religious, all of a sudden, you're just thinking. You're wondering about this. You know, what's going on here? Where is this going to lead? And so, God is sending this locust plague, and he said, I want you to talk about this for years to come. Well, you think about it. At this point, they're experiencing the locust plague in real time. What about the children and the grandchildren? Why would the grandparents talk about this? Why would they tell the future generations? Why would they pass this down? And what value is that? And what's the lesson? Yeah. What'd you say? Power of God? Follow God. Okay. Yeah. And why? I mean, what is this pointing toward? Something worse. You know, so when Papa is talking to his grandkids and they're out fishing or they're out hunting or they're just sitting around the campfire, he's going to tell about this locust plague that happened in his day. And he's going to tell about how bad it was, how they stripped the trees. They stripped the bark off the trees. Just imagine what that must have looked like. You know, I kind of think about, you remember when Mount St. Helens erupted and how the forest, the trees were just stripped and they were bent over, and it just looked, you know, it just looked eerie. Well, that's what the land looked like then. So he's telling them about it, but he doesn't need to say, wow, this was an amazing event. He's going to go on and he's going to say, and this is why we need to follow God. God sent that locust plague to wake us up. And as you look around and you see how we now are becoming much more like society, we need to wake up. And we need to understand that God can cause something far worse than this to happen. Verse 4, what the gnawing locust has left, the swarming locust has eaten. And what the swarming locust has left, the creeping locust has eaten. And what the creeping locust has left, the stripping locust has eaten. How long do you think a locust plague like this would last? 10 minutes? 20 minutes? Like a tornado? Okay, we're going to have to think bigger, people, than army worms. They're not going to strip the trees. Waves. That's the key. And that's what you see here. You see successive stages, either successive stages of the development of the locust, which are affecting the land, or there's wave after wave after wave of locust. He speaks later on of the years of the locust. And so this could have been something that went on for months. And again, if it's something, is this the only locust plague that's ever happened? And no. They had seen locust plagues, maybe the 20-minute, maybe the 30-minute, maybe the swarm that came through, but they'd never seen anything like this. This didn't happen in 10 minutes. This was something that went on for weeks or months, possibly. And the land was just utterly devastated. He then calls for them to wake up. This is the wake-up call. Who does he call on first to wake up? The drunkards. Otis, get up. And weep. And wail, all you wine drinkers, on account of the sweet wine that is cut off from your mouth. The land of plenty, the land of luxury, has become the land of nothing. It's a barren land. For a nation, verse 6, he describes the locust plague as a nation. We're going to see him describe it as an army. And again, this is God's army. This is God's hand of judgment. Mighty and without number. Its teeth are like the teeth of a lion, and it has the fangs of a lioness. It has made my vine a waste, and my fig tree splinters. It has stripped them bare and cast them away. Their branches have become white. Again, just see a tree that's stripped of its bark. Well, like a virgin girded with sackcloth for the bridegroom of her youth. This is going to be like a bride losing her bridegroom. The grain offering and the drink offering are cut off from the house of the Lord. The priests mourn. The ministers of the Lord. Why are they mourning? Because the material for their sacrifice, the material for their worship is gone. If they wake up and say, hey, we need to start doing worship the way God wants us to worship, we need to start offering these sacrifices, well, guess what? You don't have anything to sacrifice. You don't have anything to offer to God. The field is ruined. The land mourns, for the grain is ruined. The new wine dries up. Fresh oil fails. Be ashamed, O farmers. Wail, O vine dressers, for the wheat and the barley, because the harvest of the field is destroyed. The vine dries up and the fig tree fails. The pomegranate, the palm also, and the apple tree, all the trees of the field dry up. Indeed, rejoicing dries up from the sons of men. And we're going to see in this book, like we did in Hosea, a lot of redundancy. He's going to restate the same thing several times in different ways. But it's the consequences of the plague, which is the consequence of their sin. Had God ever used a locust plague before to bring about judgment? Egypt. It was one of the 10 plagues. So this was a mechanism in nature that God could use to judge sinful people. Gird yourselves with sackcloth. What was sackcloth? It's the dress of mourning. It was a coarse material that was worn close to the body, and it just kind of elevated the mourning to the M-O-U-R-N-I-N-G to the next level. Gird yourselves with sackcloth and lament, O priest. Wail, O ministers of the altar. Come spend the night in sackcloth, O ministers of my God. For the grain offering and the drink offering are withheld from the house of your God. Consecrate a fast. Proclaim a solemn assembly. Gather the elders and all the inhabitants of the land to the house of the Lord your God and cry out to the Lord. He's calling upon national prayer. The people to come together and lift their voices up to God. Verse 15, alas for the day of the Lord is near. If Joel was one of the first prophets, earliest prophets, he was probably the first to use this expression, the day of the Lord. And it's an expression that's going to be used time and time again. We're going to see it as we study through the minor prophets. What is the day of the Lord? It's judgment. It's a day of judgment. How many days of the Lord have there been? Only one? We don't know exactly, but there's been many. Every time God brings judgment against people, as we read about the history in the Old Testament, it's another day of the Lord. Is there coming a great day of the Lord? There is coming the day of the Lord. The day of the Lord that we expect is the day when Jesus returns. When Jesus returns, it's going to be a time of judgment. It's not going to be a locust plague. It's not going to come and go. It's going to be eternal judgment. But it's also going to be a time of deliverance. And what we'll see in the book of Joel, and we see this in virtually every book of prophecy, is that not only will there be judgment, but there will be deliverance. When God judged Egypt, was there deliverance? There was deliverance of the Israelites from Egyptian bondage. Alas for the day, verse 15, for the day of the Lord is near, and it will come as destruction from the Almighty. Has not food been cut off before our eyes, gladness and joy from the house of our God? The seeds shrivel under their clods. The storehouses are desolate. The barns are torn down, for the grain is dried up. How the beasts groan, the herds of cattle wander aimlessly, because there's no pasture for them. Even the flocks of sheep suffer. Does nature suffer when man sins? Anybody think about the statement in the book of Romans that speaks to this? You better remember. All the creation groans. All the creation groans, waiting for that day. Nature suffers when man sins. The consequences of sin not only affect humanity, it affects all of God's creation. To you, O Lord, I cry, verse 19, for fire has devoured the pastures of the wilderness, and the flame has burned up all the trees of the field. And again, we see the fire following the locust plague because all the green is gone. Everything is dry. It's ripe for fires, not forest fires, but fires in general. And this is what you see in California. When the water is withheld, don't get me started. What did they expect? You know, let's just cut the water off, save that little bitty fish, and we'll destroy all the land with fire. So even the beasts of the field pant for you, for the water brooks are dried up, and fire has devoured the pastures of the wilderness. Before we move on, let me ask this. Do you think God sends wake-up calls today? Yeah? You do. I mean, you do think that? I do. I can't prove it. You know, people who lived at this time who didn't have Joel, people who lived at this time who didn't have God, did they attribute this to God? Could they take this locust plague and prove that it was from God? Those who had the book of Joel could. But we don't have a book of 911, do we? We don't have a book of the pandemic, do we? But we have record of how God uses natural calamity as a wake-up call. And what did happen with 911? Was it kind of a religious revival? Maybe it didn't last. What about during the pandemic? A lot of people found religion, didn't they? Maybe it didn't last. What about in your individual life? When you have a locust plague that hits your house, it's kind of a wake-up call, isn't it? And it's not. You can't just say, well, this is definitely God. You know, we like to throw that phrase around. This is a God thing. I think that's thrown around a little bit too much. But every now and then something happens, and you say, man, this had to be a God thing. And this wakes you up and it brings you back to God. Adversity does that. You know, it's when times are good. We saw when we studied the book of Hosea, the nation of Israel God blessed them, and what happened? They got fat, and they got spiritually lazy, and they drifted away from God. It happens. All right, chapter 2. Blow a trumpet in Zion. Why are we going to blow a trumpet? Sound the alarm. Let's wake up. Sound an alarm on my holy mountain. Let all the inhabitants of the land tremble, for the day of the Lord is coming. Surely it is near. A day of darkness and gloom, a day of clouds and thick darkness. As the dawn is spread over the mountains, so there is a great and mighty people. There's never been anything like it, nor will there be anything after it to the years of many generations. What is he talking about? Talking about the locust plague. That's the same thing he said in chapter 1 and verse 2. There's never been anything like this. And this is why I think it came in waves. It's like chapter 1 is looking backward. Chapter 2 is saying there's going to be more. There's going to be more. This is the day of the Lord. This is God's judgment. I think it's the locust plague. Well, and he describes the locust as an army. Yeah. Now, if it's a harbinger of judgment, then what is to come? People, armies, Assyrians, Babylonians, and then even Greeks, and then Romans. So there's going to be human armies. There's going to be warfare. And that those eat. When Jerusalem fell in 586 BC, that was the day of the Lord. When the northern kingdom was taken into Assyrian captivity, that was the day of the Lord. When Jerusalem was destroyed in AD 70, because of the rejection of the Messiah by the Jews, that was the day of the Lord. In fact, Matthew chapter 24, when Jesus speaks of the destruction of Jerusalem, he uses the same language. When we read in the book of Revelation about the downfall of the Roman Empire, and that empire fallen because of their persecution of God's people, he uses the same language. This is the value of the study of these Old Testament prophets. It not only helps us to understand Acts chapter 2, the day of Pentecost, and what was actually happening. It not only helps us understand Romans chapter 10 and verse 13, that is, that God is no respecter of persons, and whoever calls on his name will be saved, but it also helps us to understand those passages that are quoted where similar language is used. Now let me ask you this. Does the expression a day of darkness and gloom fit a locust plague? I mean, if there's this many locusts coming, it's going to be like a dark cloud. It's not, you're not going to see the individual locust. It's going to be like a cloud that's coming, and then a day of clouds and thick darkness, and the dawn is spread over the mountain. So there is this great and mighty people. There's never been anything like it, nor there be anything after it, to the years of many generations. A fire consumes before them, and behind them a flame burns. The land is like the Garden of Eden before them. What was the Garden of Eden like? Lush, plush paradise, but a desolate wilderness behind them, and nothing at all escapes them. You know, use your imagination. We've never experienced this. We've never seen this, but just use your imagination. Think about what you see outside right now, and all of a sudden, you just hear in the distance this roar. Sounds like a lion. Sounds like hundreds of lions, and the land is trembling because there's so many locusts. Are you getting scared? Somebody turn the lights off.
It's not just the here and now when they're eating everything, but think about the future, the next season. You know, when you're expecting everything to come out in springtime, it's not going to come out.
Yeah.
So there's your hope.
Your hope's gone. Yeah. Their appearance, and this is why I say this is the locust, their appearance is like the appearance of horses, and like war horses. So they run with a noise as of chariots. They leap on the tops of the mountains like the crackling of a flame of fire, consuming the stubble, like a mighty people arranged for battle. Before them, the people are in anguish. All faces turn pale. The blood leaves their face. They're so terrified. They run like mighty men. They climb the wall like soldiers. And they each march in line, nor do they deviate from their paths. They do not crowd each other. They march everyone in his path when they burst through the defenses. They do not break ranks. They rush on the city. They run on the wall. They climb into the houses. They enter through the windows like a thief. Can you see that? You can board your house up as much as you can board it up, but those locusts are going to find a way in. Before them, the earth quakes. You know, there was actually a locust plague in 1915 in Palestine, and historians wrote about this, and I know this is graphic and this is gross, but they told about the locusts coming through so quickly that mothers would have their babies outside, and when they went out, the locusts would have eaten their babies' faces off. I mean, that's just how bad it was. And you know, as bad as that sounds, what did we learn when we studied Hosea about the Assyrians ripping up the bellies of the pregnant women? You know, and again, this is stuff that, I mean, it sounds terrible, but it actually happened. And it shows us how angry God was with his people and the judgment that he brought against them. And why was he angry? Did he have a right to be angry? We talked about this when we studied Hosea. He raised them up. He gave them everything. He blessed them time after time after time. And then what did they do with the blessings? The material goods they received, they offered in sacrifices to the false images. And he sent prophet after prophet to warn them. And what did they do? They just went deeper and deeper into sin. That's the generation that would follow this one. So those papaws, when they're telling their grandkids about this locust plague, for many it just didn't register. It didn't sink in. Do people always listen? Are they listening now? I mean, they can read the Bible. What's the day of the Lord going to be like when Jesus returns? What's some of the things that's going to happen? Every knee will bow. Everything you see is going to be burned up. The angels are going to come in flaming fire, taking retribution against those who do not know God and do not obey the gospel. Angels are going to come. God's a jealous God. God's a God of love. He's a God of compassion. He's a God of mercy. But our God is also a consuming fire. We read about that in the book of Hebrews. Where am I? What verse? Oh, I got to go. Before them the earth quakes, the heavens tremble, the sun and the moon grow dark, and the stars lose their brightness. Again, you can just see. You think about times of war. The moon turning red. What causes that? The moon looking like blood. Smoke rising from the fires of war. Darkening the sun. That's language of judgment. The Lord utters his voice, verse 11, before his army. Surely his camp is very great. For strong is he who carries out his word. The day of the Lord is indeed great and very awesome, and who can endure it? Yet even now, declares the Lord. Here's the good news. Return to me with all your heart and with fasting, weeping, and mourning, and rend your heart and not your garments. Stop giving me these outward expressions of piety. Stop doing these things that religious people do just to pretend that they're religious. Give me a heart. Give me a broken and contrite spirit. Rend your garments, now return to the Lord your God, for he is gracious and compassionate, slow to anger, abounding in love and kindness, and relenting of evil. Who knows whether he will not turn and relent and leave a blessing behind him, even a grain offering and a drink offering for the Lord your God. Blow a trumpet in Zion, consecrate a fast, proclaim a solemn assembly. Gather the people, sanctify the congregation, assemble the elders, gather the children and the nursing infants. Let the bridegroom come out of his room and the bride out of her bridal chamber. Let's wake up. Let's come together. Let's repent. Let's change. Let the priests, the Lord's ministers, weep between the porch and the altar. And let them say, spare your people, O Lord. And do not make your inheritance a reproach, a byword among the nations. Why should they among the people say, where is their God? And that's what they became. They became a reproach to pagan peoples who ask, where's your God now? Where is your God? Why has God left you? Don't be the kind of people that are going to create that situation. Then the Lord will be zealous. He'll be zealous for his land and will have pity on his people. The Lord will answer and say to his people, behold, I'm going to send you grain, new wine and oil, and you will be satisfied and full with them. And I will never again make you a reproach among the nations. But I'll remove the northern army. And locusts, historically, at times, did come from the north. I'll remove the northern army far from you. I'll drive it into a parched and desolate land, and its vanguard into the eastern sea. Eastern sea, Dead Sea. And its rear guard into the western sea. Western sea, Mediterranean Sea. And its stench will arise and its foul smell will come up, for it has done great things. Can you imagine a locust plague of this magnitude and they're all put to death? Can you imagine what that would smell like? That would be almost as bad as the locust plague. Do not fear, O land, rejoice and be glad, for the Lord has done great things. Do not fear, beasts of the field, for the pastures of the wilderness have turned green. For the tree has borne its fruit, the fig tree and the vine have yielded in full. So rejoice, O sons of Zion, and be glad in the Lord your God. For he has given you the early rain for your vindication, and he has poured down for you the rain, the early and the latter rain as before. The threshing floors will be full of grain, and the vats will overflow with the new wine and oil. Then I will make up to you for the years. This is why I say this went on for a long time. I will make up to you for the years that the swarming locust has eaten, the creeping locust, the stripping locust, and the gnawing locust, my great army which I sent among you. You will have plenty to eat and be satisfied, and praise the name of the Lord your God, who has dealt wondrously with you. Then my people will never be put to shame. Thus you will know that I am the midst of Israel, and that I am the Lord your God, and there is no other. And my people will never be put to shame. And what did they have to do to experience these blessings? They had to repent. They had to return to the Lord. They had to call on the name of the Lord. So here we go. Chapter 2, verse 28. It will come about after this. Now, this is what Peter quotes on the day of Pentecost. Peter was using it to explain what you're seeing here. Let's stop this petty thinking. Let's get past drinking early in the morning and let's see what's really taking place. This is the fulfillment of God's vision for humanity. This is the fulfillment of God's plan to redeem mankind. This is the fulfillment of all the prophecies that pointed toward Jesus. And there's going to be this ushering in of an age of plenty, spiritual abundance. It will come about after this that I will pour out my spirit on all mankind, and your sons and your daughters will prophesy. Your old men will dream dreams. Your young men will see visions. Even on the male and female servants, I will pour out my spirit in those days. This is the messianic period during which God sent the Holy Spirit upon the apostles to guide them to all truth, to perform miracles that would verify the message, and then others upon whom the apostles would place their hands would also have the ability to speak in tongues. Philip, the evangelist, had 4 daughters who were prophetesses. So there were old people who had the ability to work under the influence of the Holy Spirit. There were younger ones. There were male. There were female. This is the ushering in of the period of Messiah. I will display wonders in the sky and on the earth, blood, fire, and columns of smoke. The sun will be turned into darkness and the moon into blood before the great and awesome day of the Lord comes. And I think this probably points also to the destruction of Jerusalem, again in AD 70, which took place because of the Jews' rejection of Jesus as being the Messiah. And it will come about in verse 32 that whoever, this is Romans 10:13, quoted, it will come about that whoever calls on the name of the Lord will be delivered. For on Mount Zion and in Jerusalem there will be those who escape, as the Lord has said, even among the survivors whom the Lord calls. So hundreds of years before the time of Christ, when this locust plague that no one had ever seen anything like before took place, Joel was speaking, this is God's judgment, but there's going to come a day. There's going to come a day of rejoicing and spiritual blessing, and that's going to come when Jesus arrives. Comments or questions on the first two chapters? Okay.
To me, what is so interesting about it is when you start reading down in verse 38. You shall carry much seed out into the field, but little in, little to gather in, for the locust shall consume it. You shall plant vineyards and tend to them, but you shall not drink the wine nor gather the grapes, for worms shall eat them. So there's the locusts and the vineyards. And then it goes on to talk about you shall have olive trees throughout your territory, but you shall not anoint yourself with oil, where the olives shall drop off. And in Joel, you read about the vineyards, the locusts, the wine, or the fruit of the vine, and then that last is the oil. And it's in that exact same pattern here in Joel. You read them right in a
Yep.
row, just like that in succession.
So where were you reading from?
That's Deuteronomy 28.
Okay.
Where the blessings and the cursings were given by Moses when the people were separated onto the mountains. If you go back and read that, it is the literal description of what happens
Yeah.
here.
Yeah, that's good. So take some time to go back and read Deuteronomy 27, 28. Put that in its historical context. That's Moses delivering a series of speeches on the plains of Moab to the Israelites prior to their entrance into the Promised Land. So everything that happened should not have surprised them, because God told them exactly what would happen and why it would happen. They were without excuse. You look at the punishment, you look at the judgment, you look at its severity, and you say, how could God be this way? Well, God told them. God didn't want this to happen. He said there's the blessing and there's the curse. It could have been either one. It could have been the blessing. But instead it was the curse. And it was because they did exactly what God said they would do. They departed from Him. History repeats itself. They become cannibals. Yeah. Is that thunder? I love it when that happens at just the right time. Okay, we're not going to get into chapter 3. I only have a couple minutes. So what's a takeaway for you for today from this? It's easier. It's easier to understand than Hosea. Yeah. Well, and it kind of maybe helps you understand Hosea. Yeah. Yeah, you see reference to sin, but you don't see the specifics like you do in Hosea. He hammers the specifics in Hosea. This is very general. Yeah. Yeah. But worse. Good. You know, one thing that I remember the first time I studied the Minor Prophets, one of the things I took away from it was, you know, for most of us, history is from the time we were born until right now. We're familiar with that little chunk of history that is our life. But and maybe we've studied Alabama history. You remember that? Was that fourth grade? You know, or United States history or world history. You know, we've studied it, but when you study it from a spiritual perspective, you really start to see that nations don't last forever. You know, that really hit me between the eyes when I studied this, and I'm not prophesying of the downfall of the United States, but is there any guarantee that this nation is going to exist with its current power indefinitely? I mean, if history does repeat itself, and everything about history says that it does, there's going to come a day when this nation is going to come to an end. You know, even in our lifetimes, we've seen that. If you're my age, you've seen, when I was a kid, man, we were terrified of nuclear war and Russia. And then in my lifetime, I saw Russia become a weak nation. But now what's happening? Russia's becoming strong again. So nations rise and fall. But when you study history from this perspective, you see that there's the hand of God behind it. God's working, and He'll continue to work. Okay, we'll pick up chapter 3 next week.